Max Dowman stars for the under-18s despite a disappointing result for the Gunners. Joshua Kimmich continues to be linked with a move to Arsenal. We'll bring you the latest on that. And we'll talk Tomas Rosicky after he clarified his situation with regards to the vacant sporting director role at Arsenal. Lots to get into on this Saturday edition of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Let's do it. Hey everybody, how are we? Welcome back to another episode of the pod. Happy Saturday, a Saturday off for the Gunners, a weekend off for the Arsenal. And I'm going to make the most of it. I'm going to try and sort of regulate my stress levels. I'm going to try and take in a bit of football, but not too much. I don't want that sort of overload of football. I don't want that burnout when it comes to sort of trying to spread yourself across a number of games over the course of the day. It is an FA Cup weekend, which changes things a little bit. I got to be honest, if I'm looking for my one sort of bright star of a game this weekend, I'm looking abroad. I'm watching Napoli-Inter tonight. I've made sure that my day is clear. My time is clear. 5 p.m. tonight. I believe it's live on TNT Sports in the UK if you're interested. A massive game at the top of the Serie A. Napoli take on Inter. That should be fascinating. So if there's one game I would sort of urge you to watch this weekend, if there's one game I would say during this weekend where we're not playing, where we're not in the FA Cup, and a lot of the ties, let's be honest, are a little bit underwhelming, this is the one that I would sit down, put your feet up and take in with a nice cold beer. So yeah, Napoli-Inter is what I'm going to be doing this evening. Look, we got quite a bit to get into today. We're going to talk Max Dowman. I think we have to after the display that he put in yesterday. We're going to talk Tomas Rosicky because he has given an interview in which he kind of clarifies his situation because there have been a fair few reports over the last few weeks claiming that, you know, he's in the running for the sporting director role at Arsenal. Could it be him? I know a lot of fans are on board with that because of his sort of history with the football club. He was one of those players that was really loved, but we all knew that there was so much more that we could have got out of him if only he could have stayed fit. So he became a bit of a cult hero. We'll get into exactly what he said, what that tells us, etc., a little bit later on in the pod. And we're going to talk Joshua Kimmich because there are some credible links to the German. And we've been linked with him before. I sort of did a quick search on the Chronicles of a Gooner YouTube channel the other day. I just typed in Chronicles of a Gooner, Joshua Kimmich. And we were speaking about him probably about 8 or 9 months ago when the sort of links first begun. But obviously the situation has developed since then. Obviously he's in a different boat now, and we'll get into his situation and whether or not he'd be a good addition to the Arsenal. All on this episode. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't done so already, if you're watching us on YouTube, drop a like on the video. It really, really does help. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. And if you're listening to us on any of the audio platforms, please do leave us a review as well. I can see lots of you have been doing that recently, and that really, really does help. So thank you for your support. Right then, shall we start with Max Dowman? I mean, this guy, he looks phenomenal. He looks phenomenal. So, unfortunately, the Arsenal under-18s were knocked out of the FA Youth Cup last night at the Emirates Stadium. They were beaten by 3-2. Manchester United were the side that progressed. But, yeah, you know, it's a Youth Cup game, and, yeah, you want to do well in the Youth Cups, and it does kind of, to a degree, give you a glimpse into the future. And I know a lot of fans take these really, really seriously. I personally don't. I think if you win it, it shows that your academy is in a good state, is in good shape. And of course, that's a positive thing, right? But for me, it's about watching individual players and seeing how they cope with a pressured situation. And it is a far more pressured situation than playing your regular under-18s game for a number of reasons, right? You're in a knockout competition. You're in a competition that gets quite a bit of coverage relative to other under-18s games. So there's a lot of people watching. I tuned in at one stage on the, I think it was the FA's YouTube channel because they were live streaming the game there. I know it was being live streamed on arsenal.com as well. But at one stage when I logged on to YouTube, there was over 40,000 people watching it. How many under-18s games end up with 40,000 concurrent people watching it? And that doesn't even include those that were watching it on the Arsenal website. I don't know if Manchester United was streaming it or had it playing on MUTV or anything like that. The point I'm trying to make is that this is a big occasion for those young lads, and it's an opportunity to have a look at them in a pressured environment, which I don't always feel you get when you're talking about youth and academy football. And so I look at the individuals. Can any of those individuals on the pitch stand out and show me something that gives me belief and confidence that in the coming years, they'll be able to make that step up from academy football to senior football? And the player that I was most impressed with, the player that really kind of blew me away, Max Dowman. This guy has been on Arsenal fans' lips for quite some time. There's been a lot of talk about him and how he's impressed. 14 years old he was when he sort of first came to people's attention. He is 15 now, but still to be 15 and playing at that level and performing the way he is pretty remarkable. I think about how you develop as well physically from the age of 15 to 18. It can be quite difficult to kind of make up those years. It's a lot easier than, it's a lot harder making that jump up from 15 to 18 than it is from 18 to 22, for example, because physically you've done a lot of your growing. At 15, I don't know if you're quite there yet. I know everybody's different, but it feels to me like, not only are you required to have the kind of mentality and attitude of a far more mature 18-year-old, but you're also expected to compete with those boys physically as well. And Max Dowman does all of that. There were some amazing carries of the ball. There's all sorts of compilations going around online. I'm sure a lot of you have seen them. Some amazing carries of the ball. Some brilliant line-breaking passing. A real balance, a strength about him as well, a core strength when he's on those carries, people trying to knock him off the ball, and he just stays so balanced and strong. Really, really intelligent footballer, even at that age. And you wonder how good this kid can be if he continues to develop at this pace and at this speed. And I'll make the comparison to Ethan Nwaneri. Sometimes when you look at a player, you just know that they've got it. And of course, there are lots of things that can potentially go wrong between being 15 years old, like Max Dowman is, and ending up in the Arsenal first team, right? There's a lot of variables. There's a lot of things that you're responsible for, that your club are going to be responsible for in terms of how much exposure they give you, how much they protect you. There's a lot, right? There's a lot that still needs to be done to nurture this talent and get it to a place that it essentially deserves to be because of just that raw natural gift that Max Dowman seems to have. For a long time, I've heard the hype about Max Dowman without it, really kind of having too much of an impact on me and an effect on me, because in truth, all I'd seen was a few compilations and a few clips that were going around on social media. But when you start to sort of take an interest in a player and then you make an effort, like I got to be honest, a big part of why last night I sat down and watched most of this game was because I wanted to see Max Dowman. Like that's what I wanted. That was the draw for me. That was the lure for me. And I'd said all week that come the weekend, I'm going to disconnect from football. And I'd said it to a mate of mine as well. And he came around last night. And we sat down and I said, listen, mate, like, I don't want to watch any football. I don't want to talk about any football. I'm just trying to disconnect. It's been a bruising week for Arsenal supporters, right? I just need a break. I need a breather. But he came round and I was watching the FA Youth Cup game and he goes, I knew you couldn't stay away. Like you couldn't keep it turned off. Like you not knowing it's going on, it's just impossible for you, isn't it? If you're not busy, if you're just sitting on the couch, to avoid that and watch something completely unrelated. And so I got drawn in. I got sucked in, but I got drawn in because I wanted to watch Max Dowman. And this is the thing, right? That hype that is there, it creates greater and further interest, but then they got to live up to that hype. Then they got to live up to that billing. And Max Dowman on an individual level last night 100% did that. And that's really, really encouraging because, as I say, it is a step up. You're talking about a 15-year-old. I know he's playing with those guys week in, week out. And I know he's even been in situations where he's been training with the first team. So he's no stranger to sort of having to reach above his weight in terms of where he punches. But I think to see him do it on that stage at the Emirates Stadium as well was really impressive. And it really did take me aback. I got to be honest. Let's have a look at what some of you guys are saying in the live chat with regards to the youngster. Danny says, I heard a few things before I watched the Champions League youth game against Monaco. He came on and just ran the show at 15 years old. Says a lot, doesn't it? says a lot about how good this young man is. Nuances of Fate says, I thought Ife Ibrahim was also impressive. Went on about his business quietly. Yep, he was another player that I think double checking that I've got the right guy. Bear with me a second. Hold on a sec. I just want to make sure that I'm thinking of the same guy as you. Hold on. Let me just load this page up. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Lineups. Yeah. That's the one. Right. Just looking at his picture to make sure I've got the right guy. Yeah, I thought he was solid as well. But for me, there was two players I was interested in watching. I was interested in watching Dowman, and I was interested in watching Harry Symeou because he's another player that we've heard quite a bit about recently. And he's even been floated as an option to sort of come into the team in the absence of a centre forward for Arsenal at the minute. But Dowman was definitely the standout player, definitely the one that for me stole the show. Okay, we're going to move on. Let's talk next about Tomas Rosicky. Would you have him as sporting director? Let's get into it. Now, I'd be lying if I said that I'd sort of watched loads of Tomas Rosicky's Sparta Prague recently. Okay, I'd be lying if I said I knew all the ins and outs of the job that he's done, and I understood the position that Sparta were in versus where they are today, and Tomas Rosicky's role in getting them from A to B. Okay, I don't want to sit here and lie and pretend to you guys as if I'm right across Czech football, because I'm not, right? But when the name Tomas Rosicky came up as a potential option, as a potential candidate for the job, I was quite excited because one of the things that I felt really did work in Edu's favor was that kind of goodwill that the fans had with him already because of his playing days. And I think often it's quite difficult to warm up to the guys in suits, if you like, right? They're upstairs, they're working away in the background. Of course, they have huge power and they have a huge impact on what happens. But when you don't have that connection to them, it's easy to be quite skeptical, isn't it? And it's easy to kind of really hone in on the negatives without sort of ever really stopping to consider what the positives might be. And I think because we are old school football fans in a lot of cases, whereby we're used to the good old days where Arsene Wenger would decide who we signed. Arsene Wenger would do pretty much everything, where Sir Alex Ferguson would do the same, right? We're used to that kind of breed of manager and model. And as football's developed and changed, we've got to a place where sporting directors now play a massive part. But because they're guys in suits, and because in a lot of cases they don't have that affiliation necessarily with the club and with the supporters, you can get into this mindset. And I certainly think I'm guilty of this, where you're always sort of wondering whether their intentions are the right intentions. I never felt like that with Edu. I felt that way with Raul Sanllehi. I know it wasn't exactly the same role, but when he was at the club, I felt that way about Sven Mislintat. I was kind of waiting for them to trip up so that I could have a moan and complain. Whereas with Edu, I was the opposite. I would defend Edu because I already had that affiliation with him. I already felt that warmth towards him. I already felt like he had the club's best interests at heart because of what he'd achieved with the Arsenal as a player. And so the same applies with Tomas Rosicky. If you're telling me that some random guy is going to come in that I've never heard of and that I know very little about versus Tomas Rosicky, the nostalgic part of me and the emotional side of me is always going to side with Tomas Rosicky. And so that's why if he is as good a candidate as some of the others that we've been discussing over the last couple of days, then he has to be someone you seriously consider. Because not only has he done a good job at Sparta Prague, at least on a kind of surface level, as far as I can see it, and based on what I'm reading and what I'm being told, he has that connection and that affiliation with the Arsenal. Now, we heard David Ornstein the other day talking about this sporting director situation, and he put out a list of people that were known to be, and the key word here is among those that the club had spoken to, right? So it doesn't mean that they haven't spoken to anybody else. It doesn't mean that it's only going to be one of those guys, but the players or the people that were discussed were Dan Ashworth, Thiago Scuro, Jason Ato, obviously, who's doing the role on an interim basis at the moment. uh, Andrea Berta. Those were the names that were mentioned by David Ornstein. And interestingly, and I said this in our sort of reaction pod when we were sort of reflecting on that report, I did say it was interesting to me that Rosicky's name was not mentioned, because we'd heard quite a bit about him being at least one of the candidates and in the running. So Tomas Rosicky did a podcast. He spoke to Flash Scores Live Sport Daily podcast, and this is what he said. My connection with Arsenal is natural because I spent 10 years there, and in that time, you form a very strong bond. I have it with Arsenal and Sparta. They are the two clubs that I love. Just the fact that I am there in some people's thoughts, in the thoughts of the Arsenal management, is an honor for me. But I have no offer to go and work at Arsenal. So that tells us that Tomas Rosicky knows that he's at least been considered, knows that he's at least featured on someone at the club's list, but that there's been no offer. There might not have been an offer to anybody at this stage, though. That's the thing, right? So, you want to read into that too much? I'm not sure you should at this stage. Like, there might be an offer forthcoming. But Tomas Rosicky is making it clear that, there has been some interest shown in him. And obviously he talks about the connection between the club. And if you read between the lines, him kind of saying, look, the only two clubs I've got that with are Arsenal and Sparta. You feel like if Arsenal came knocking, it would just be impossible for him, no matter where he is. No matter where he is in the sort of pecking order. Pecking order. No matter where he is in terms of that project, I think if Arsenal came knocking, I think Tomas Rosicky would have to take the job. So, yeah, again, I look through what he's done, and given the league that he's done it in, given the club that he's done it with, I don't hold him in the same esteem when we're talking about purely achievements as your Andrea Bertas, as your Thiago Skouros, as your Dan Ashworths, as your Roberto Alabes. He's not in that league in terms of what's gone before. But was Edu when he came in? No. And I would say it's fair to say that he done a really, really good job. And for those that were always really sort of critical of Edu and I think gave him a rough ride, you're going to see that now. Because look, Edu had his head turned by another football club. It didn't work out in terms of the promotion that he was looking for at Arsenal for whatever reason. We're not going to get into that stuff today. But last summer was the beginning for me of Arsenal starting to drop the ball. And in the January window, with an interim sporting director in place, I'm not saying it's solely down to Jason Ato, but you have to factor in the fact that we don't have an actual sporting director right now. We've got an interim one, and we've probably had our worst window in the last 5 years. So, you can make that connection. I think it's fair and valid to make that connection. Rosicky does not stack up to those other names mentioned in terms of his history. But the connection, the fact that he's young, driven, ambitious, that might be something that the club see as, worth its weight in gold. And again, I'm not saying that this is likely, because for me, I was quite surprised that he wasn't on the David Ornstein shortlist, if you like. But I do read into that. I do think that if he was that close to taking on the role, or if he was in that sort of pack of the top few, in terms of who's going to get the job between now and whenever it's announced and whenever it's finally decided, I think he would have been in that list, and he isn't. So I think the likelihood of this happening is not very high, but I really like the idea of someone like Tomas Rosicky because of that connection. And when you've got that connection, that buys you a bit of time with the fans for sure. Edu experienced that. Edu benefited from that. Edu done a fantastic job, in my opinion, and has moved on. I wouldn't be surprised if the club went down a similar route in terms of trying to find an Arsenal guy, if you like, to take up what's going to be a very demanding and pressurized role, particularly given those windows that I've just sort of reflected on. So Tomas Rosicky, is he in the mix? Seems as though he knows there was some interest, or that he was at least in people's thoughts, but he confirms that he's had no offer yet. However, we don't know that anybody's had an offer yet. So, just keep your powder dry in terms of judging that one. Right, we're going to move on to our final story, but just a quick reminder, if you haven't done so already, please leave a like on the video. If you're with us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel if you are brand spanking new. All of that stuff really, really does help. If you're listening to us on audio, please do leave us a review. Right, short pause. And when we come back, we're talking Joshua Kimmich. Okay, so there was a report yesterday that came from Sky Germany's Florian Plettenberg, normally pretty good, particularly when it comes to Bayern Munich stuff. So let's have a look at what he posted yesterday. What time was this? I think it was, let's have a look, February 28th, 11:18 a.m. So sort of mid-morning, he put this out with regards to Joshua Kimmich. Now, just to reiterate what I was saying at the beginning of the pod, we talked about him about 8 months ago. His contract situation at Bayern, he's out of contract in the summer. There is an offer to renew on the table, but Florian Plettenberg seems to think and seems to believe that it's not cut and dry that Joshua Kimmich is going to sign that renewal, and therefore he's available in the summer as things stand at the moment. So it's an exclusive from the Sky Germany reporter. He said, for several days, Arsenal have been one of the clubs with a concrete interest in Joshua Kimmich and have held talks. The Gunners would like to sign him on a free transfer as a possible replacement for Jorginho. Kimmich now has received 2 written offers from abroad, 1 from the Premier League. That's the main reason why he's hesitating to sign a new deal with Bayern at least until 2028 and a salary of 20 to 22 million euros gross per year. Kimmich has informed Bayern about the offers, but from Kimmich's camp, it is said that discussions with Erbel and Freund are still ongoing. For Kimmich, an agreement on a new contract remains possible, and Bayern are ready to negotiate again, but now only willing to pay the same amount or less. So let's break that down a little bit, okay? I like this player, first and foremost. I think he's a very good player, and I think he fits into the Mikel Arteta model in a lot of ways. He's a very technically gifted player, really good set-piece taker, and he's shown throughout the duration of his career, particularly during his time at Bayern, that he can play at right back and he can play at centre midfield. And I think in a team where you ask your fullbacks to go into midfield quite a bit, Joshua Kimmich feels like a really, really good fit. Jorginho could be leaving in the summer. So could Thomas Partey. We're going to have to wait and see how those two situations develop. It looks like we're trying to go big for Martin Zubimendi, who would be our kind of flagship midfield signing. But it's clear that if we lost both Partey and Jorginho, we would definitely need 2. And Joshua Kimmich could be that second guy. Now, I've seen some people online raise concerns with the salary. The offer that he has on the table right now is 20 to 22 million euros gross, not net, gross. So Arsenal would have to, you'd assume, get close to that. But what people maybe don't realize and are maybe overlooking in this conversation is that actually, when you sign a player on a free transfer, obviously you don't have to pay the club that you're taking him from any money. What often happens, though, is a signing on fee is agreed between the buying club and the player and the player's camp. So what you could find is that Arsenal get him officially on a free transfer, but maybe give him a 5-10 million quid signing on fee, which then allows them to just come down a little bit slightly on the wages. In terms of the general point of kind of overinflated wages, if you get someone on a free transfer and you avoid the transfer fee, there's a good chance you're going to have to pay over the top wages, because if they're of this quality, like Joshua Kimmich, there will be a number of clubs interested in them. And therefore, you have to be competitive. Therefore, you have to give them something. You have to offer them something that leads them to believe that your club is the right club. Okay? So this idea of like paying inflated wages to a free transfer and it being the worst thing that a football club can possibly do, I'm sorry, but it's the reality. There's a line, of course, and there's a limit that you don't want to push beyond. But to give someone a little bit extra in terms of salary because you're not paying a transfer fee is common practice. It's common. It happens all the time in our sport. So I'm not too worried or too concerned about that. And we talk so much, don't we, about having the balance between young, developing, really strong footballers, but also those experienced campaigners, those that have kind of been around the block, been there, done it. And Joshua Kimmich is exactly that. He's had a wonderful career. He's he's played a massive part for Germany over the years. He's 30 years old, so he's by no means over the hill, as people like to say. He's got 6 assists in the Bundesliga, 4 assists in the Champions League. He's someone who can provide. He can play, defensive midfield. He can play right back. He can play as a more conventional central midfielder. And if you look at his sort of trophy haul, you've got a player who has won, and let me just tell you exactly, 1 Champions League, 1 FIFA Club World Cup, 8 German championships, a UEFA Super Cup, 3 German Cups, 6 German Super Cups. He's won a Confederations Cup, and he won an under-19 European Championship with Germany back in 2014. Right, so this guy is a winner. This guy's a winner. And if you could bring him in for nothing, okay, maybe you got to give something of a signing on fee, and maybe the wages are going to be a little bit more than you'd have liked in an ideal world. I think this is a bit of business worth doing. I've always liked Joshua Kimmich. I've always been impressed with him whenever I've watched him play. I think he's got great experience. I think he's a real intelligent footballer. And I think technically he's on a really, really high level, which I think is what we're looking for. And probably what we're lacking. We talk a lot about Arsenal being a really physically robust side these days. And I always sort of point to the fact that I think on the technical level, we're probably lacking a little bit. And we're probably not as good as some of the other top teams because we've prioritized physicality. And when you need that bit of guile, that little bit of creativity, that little bit of quality, it's not always been there for Arsenal in recent times. And I think Kimmich would bring a load of that. Do I think that Kimmich should be our only midfield signing? No. But on a free transfer, I think he'd be another good addition. And I do believe we'll probably find ourselves in a situation where we need 2 in the midfield in the summer. And that's why I keep saying that, people are focusing on a striker and on a winger. And yes, we absolutely need to recruit in those positions, but that's not where our needs end. We've got more that we need to do. There's other areas that need regeneration, because when you build something and it works for you for a number of years, and then you sort of move to regenerating something else, the chances are that what you did initially has changed or is a little bit outdated, and you got to go back. And obviously signing Jorginho was never really a future-proof signing. Thomas Partey's at the stage that he is in his career, and he's had countless injury problems. You wonder if you could ever really trust in him fully. And he's been fit a lot this season, and that's great, and I'm glad to see it. But given his history, you'd be silly, I think, to take a massive gamble on him and him staying fit for you for another season and sort of leading that midfield as he does. So, I like the idea of this. I do. Lloyd says, I don't get this Kimmich move. He's a DM/left back. He's not a left back. He's more a right back if he's going to play as a fullback. He's probably filled in there for Bayern from time to time. But Joshua Kimmich is a midfield player by trade. I think he's often been frustrated by the fact that he's had to play at fullback. So I do wonder if he'd be coming in as a kind of hybrid, or if he'd be coming in as someone that, would just be a midfielder, maybe telling him that he's coming in as a midfielder and utilizing him in that way. That might be what gets the deal over the line. Who knows? But he says, are we not interested in Zubi? If so, why this Kimmich interest? Don't get it. I've kind of explained that I think we're probably going to need to do more than one bit of business when it comes to the midfield. Nuances of Fate says, it seems like he's using our interest to get a bigger deal from Bayern. Maybe. We don't know. It's way too early in the year to kind of really understand the dynamics of the summer transfer window. But what is fact is that he's likely to be available. He hasn't put pen to paper on a new Bayern Munich deal yet. And so for now, it's an option for sure. Aguna73 says the board are trying to appease the unrest from the failure of the transfer window by saying that they're after targets that they think us supporters want. Let's see what we got. Rumble says he's never leaving Bayern for a rebuild. He'll go to Manchester City if he's going to England. Well, that's a rebuild as well at the minute, isn't it? Obadiah says, as long as Kimmich is a replacement for Jorginho on the bench, I'm fine, but not as an outright starter. Interesting. You don't think he gets into this Arsenal team right now? Imran says he's a tier 1 caliber player. That rules out Arsenal. So there's a lot of skepticism around whether or not this is even possible. And I understand that. People are feeling downbeat. People are frustrated. by what's happened over the last month or so and frustrated with the situation we find ourselves in. And look, we're talking about these stories because these are the popular stories around Arsenal right now. And that's what we do on this podcast. We cover the big stories, we share views and opinions on them, and we engage with you guys in the live chat and get you your thoughts and sort of opinions as well. I'm not under any illusions. Like, I know that it's a transfer rumor for the summer that's emerged in March, well, February even. It's March now, but it was February when this story broke. So my point here is that I'm not naive enough to think that every link that is made between now and when the summer window opens is really credible, and that we should sort of get our hopes up or put our eggs in those particular baskets. But these are the stories surrounding the Arsenal right now. So I understand the skepticism. My opinion is that I'd like to see us sign Joshua Kimmich. And I said that 8 months ago. I went back and listened to what I said. I said that 8 months ago that I think he'd be a great addition. I still believe he'd be a great addition 8 months down the line. But because of this report, am I going to get excited, carried away, or assume that Arsenal are going to do this deal? No, I'm not, because as I mentioned, there's a lot of factors and a lot of things that probably need to be ironed out. Are Bayern going to give him what he wants? Is he going to prefer to stay at Bayern than come into the Premier League? He has informed them of the offers that he's got and the conversations he's had, I'm sure, because partly, as was mentioned in the chat, he wants to see what the real best Bayern can do is. And so, they're probably going to come back, and he's probably going to have another conversation with them, and he's probably going to, make a decision from that point on in. Does he want a new challenge? I mean, it's not really much else to win with Bayern, is there? So I do wonder if he's got to that stage in his career where he feels like he needs something new, in which case, can we benefit from that? Who knows? But as I say, I'm not naive enough to think that this is done or that this is a given. This is a link. This is a report. Florian Plettenberg's normally pretty good. And, even if we don't sign him, it doesn't mean that he was wrong, because all he's saying is that there have been talks held. So we're going to have to wait and see. We're going to have to wait and see how this pans out, if indeed this goes anywhere, if indeed this moves forward. But yeah, Joshua Kimmich, for me, it's a yes. It absolutely is a yes. Right, I'm going to love you all and leave you all. I'm going to go off and enjoy my football-free Saturday up until 5 p.m, where the big game takes place in Serie A. Remember to leave a like on the video if you're watching us on YouTube. Let's see where we're at. Can we get 100 likes on the board? That would be amazing. If you guys could do that before the live stream ends. There's certainly enough of you in the live chat. If you could leave us a review if you're listening on audio, that would be massively helpful as well. Subscribe on whichever platform you prefer. And a big thank you, by the way, to those that signed up to the Patreon over the last few days. I've seen a few of you joining up, which I'm really, really grateful for. So thank you for that. If you're interested in checking out our Patreon offering, patreon.com/Chronicles of a Gooner, you can find the link in the description below. I will see you all tomorrow, Sunday morning, bright and early. It might be a pre-record, just depending on how my day goes. But we're going to bring you a Q&A show. It went down really, really well the other day, the Q&A show. And I figured in the absence of a game, what better way to sort of come up with some content. So if you've got any questions or thoughts, leave them in the comment section, not the live chat, the comment section of this video, and get in touch with me on X or whatever, and throw your questions at me, and we'll work our way through some of those on Sunday. Until then, take care of yourselves. Have a great day. All the best. Goodbye.